We are excited to be joined by RJ Ochoa. He covers the Dallas Cowboys for SB Nation. RJ, thanks for coming on the show.
Of course. Happy best time of the year.
Yeah, it really is, man. Football is right around the corner. Getting excited for it. We are just days away. Of course, preseason's going on, training camp, and it's the perfect time to talk about America's team, and nobody covers it like you. So I'm excited to talk about a lot of different topics on the Cowboys, their team, and kind of the outlook for this season. I want to start with the most important player, obviously, Dak Prescott, because Dak is now going to be making a lot of money this year, $60 million a year. How much pressure would you say is on Dak this season, not only to play it really at an elite level, but also for him to help lead this team to wins and have a successful season, not just statistically, but obviously a winning season for the Cowboys?
I think the cliche answer is, pressure's a privilege, right? Like that's what like your, average high school coach would tell you or something like that. And then I think the kind of super blunt answer is like, what's going to happen if they don't get it done? People are going to say he sucks and people are going to say he's terrible. Like, oh no, Dak has never been through anything like this before. You mentioned the money. The new deal, the extension kicks in this year, obviously, because the Cowboys delayed it as long as they possibly could last year. And they're financially tied to him at the very least through 2027, probably through 2028. That won't preclude a lot of people from connecting them to Arch Manning next March and whatnot. But the reality and the facts of the situation are that he's this franchise's quarterback for the foreseeable future. Now, when you stop being so binary about it, obviously there's a lot of pressure on any quarterback. And right now, Dak is the one charged with delivering the ring to Mordor, right? Like this team has been looking for Frodo the entire time and just hasn't quite found him. And somebody I admire greatly, Bob Sturm of The Ticket in Dallas, has an incredible Substack, recently kind of compared, and people do this often, obviously, but the careers of Dak Prescott and Tony Romo, and they are the same dude. I mean, for all intents and purposes and accomplishments and failures. And the only difference is that Dak still has time, right? Like, I don't know when this is going to happen. It might be in our respective lifetimes. It might be well beyond that. But at some point, the Dallas Cowboys will win the Super Bowl once again. And whoever does, or whoever leads them to it, is going to be a god. I mean, is going to be treated in a way that is very, very, very different than your standard kind of Super Bowl winner, because they will be the one who took the ring back. And I don't know if that's Dak Prescott, in the same way that I don't know that it would be anybody, because this team is fighting a closet full of demons that is quite unique. But I think the pressure is as normal as it's ever been for him. And it's also as normal as it ever is for anybody who plays for this specific team.
Yeah, and I think Dak Prescott has handled it well. This is a hard place to play in the National Football League. It is the hardest position in the league for this team in the league collectively. But I want to move to the point of, I guess, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, Micah Parsons. There's a lot of money, obviously invested in CeeDee Lamb. There's a lot of money already invested in Dak, and now you're here. And then looming, depending upon what type of year he has, what about George Pickens? He could explode. He's in a contract year. Where do the Cowboys stand in Micah Parsons? We've heard all of the rhetoric from Jerry and, the pundits and everything, but where do they truly stand with Micah Parsons at this point in time?
I mean, in just a literal way, it feels a little bit different than Dak and then CeeDee, and a lot of the factors are different. Dak was showing up and participating in everything, and he has, this year, I think, given credit to the situations and the uniqueness of his own situation last year, and said, look, I wear a red practice jersey during training camp. It's a little bit safer for me to be out there than it is Micah. CeeDee Lamb chose to hold out in a literal and technical sense. I think the casual fan may not have fully understood the Cowboys' antics a year ago. I think the Dak and the CeeDee contract situations really kind of exposed that. And I think even, your average Dolphins fan, your average Chargers fan, your average person who, maybe hates the Cowboys can acknowledge and can admit that this front office goes about things in a way that is, seriously void of logic. And so even if you're somebody who hates Dak Prescott or thinks he isn't worth it, you were, I hope, objective enough able to say, like, they're really making this, as bad of a situation as they possibly can. They did the same thing with CeeDee Lamb. And Micah, as great as CeeDee is and as good as Dak is, Micah's an even better player, respective to his specific position. There's not a person, operating from a place of logic who can look at this situation and be like, oh, hell yeah, I see what the Cowboys are doing. They got this. Like, y'all are the ones being unreasonable here, And so I don't know how this ends, because If you had asked me in March or April of this year, I would have said, yeah, it's probably going to ripple into training camp because this team just wants to do it that way for whatever reason that they hold near and dear to their heart. But I definitely wouldn't have been able to have predicted that Michael would have held in. I think that that's twisted the story a little. And I certainly wouldn't have been able to have predicted that he would have publicly requested a trade and done so in a way where he kind of called the team out. And so it's hard to know how this ends. I think if you simulated it a million times, I think 95% of them end with him becoming the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history, which is what we thought would be the case all along. But I mean, it does seem stickier than we thought it would be. Even though it's exactly how we thought it would go, it's a little bit more drama filled, and that's kind of the Dallas Cowboys way. But for whatever, I mean, the fact that they won't even speak is just, concerning at this point in time. And so I think you have to leave the door open that anything can happen, just because some of the things that have happened we couldn't have foreseen.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to your point about Micah, because the way they've handled this situation definitely doesn't make a lot of sense on the outside. I don't think anybody can really make sense of why they're in this situation, why they keep delaying paying these star players and basically costing themselves a lot more money than they need to, when they could have got ahead of these deals. And I think it is a distraction for them right now. It's probably a distraction for the players and them trying to get ready and gear up for the season here. I want to talk about the new head coach here, Brian Schottenheimer, taking over, obviously, first-year coach. What would you say the biggest differences that you think we're going to see from this Cowboys team compared to last year under his leadership?
I think that two jump to mind, and one is kind of hard to prove right now. The one that is easy to prove is I think there will be a culture shift or an attempted culture shift. The path that the Cowboys took to getting to Brian Schottenheimer was unique, to say the least. And in case either of you or your audience forgot, the Cowboys waited on Mike McCarthy. They missed the playoffs, and they spent the whole wild card week just kind of dragging their feet, not knowing what they were going to do. And it wasn't until the Monday of the Monday final wild card game of the weekend that they finally parted ways. But what's notable about that is by burning the entire wild card week, they disallowed themselves the opportunity to speak virtually, but still in general, with the coordinators for the number one seeded teams in either conference. So they couldn't talk to Ben Johnson. They couldn't talk to Aaron Glenn. I mean, think about that. That just functionally, that's an incompetent way to go about this whole process. And then they spent that whole week, which was the divisional week, predictably interviewing Kellen Moore, and Robert Saleh was a name, and Leslie Frazier. And it wasn't until the Monday after the divisional round that Brian Schottenheimer's name just kind of entered the ether. And the reason it entered the ether was because out of nowhere, he was the favorite by betting markets and sportsbooks to be the team's head coach before being connected to even having an interview. So it was a very strange process. And this is a team that loves attention, right? We all agree with that. I don't know if either of you recall this either. The Brian Schottenheimer news, I remember because my wife was pissed, came out at 9 p.m. on a Friday night.
Yes.
And so it was almost shameful. It was almost like they were trying to hide what they did. And so it was really a toxic kind of 10, 15-day period there. Now, to his credit, Brian has done what he could, I think, to restore some semblance of a culture, and had done a great job of kind of winning press conferences. And nobody's suggesting that means that makes you a great head coach, but in April and May, that's all you can do. And I think the training camp had gotten off on the right foot. It really wasn't until Jerry and Steven both spoke in Oxnard about the Micah situation that the vibes went from feeling somewhat positive around this team right now to the same old black cloud, incompetent, we don't know why you're doing what you're doing type thing. And so I think that the challenge for Brian Schottenheimer is navigating the culture through the self-induced storms. It's one of the two. And the other, I don't mean to just quiz y'all and say, I don't know if you remember this, but when Mike McCarthy first took over play calling duties for the Cowboys, it was after the 2022 season. And he had a line at the NFL Combine where he said that all Kellen Moore wanted to do was light up the scoreboard, and he wanted to run the ball. And everybody freaked out. Everybody lost their minds. Everybody thought this dude was going to go back to the wishbone offense. Lo and behold, all they did was throw the ball. Dak finished second in MVP voting, and CeeDee had the year that he did. And so Brian Schottenheimer has talked a lot about running the ball. It's when McCarthy took over, it was easy to look at his time in Green Bay and say, okay, this is probably what this offense is going to look like because we had such a large sample size. That doesn't exist for Brian Schottenheimer. You can kind of, look at what he did in Seattle, but that was the let Russ cook, experiment. So it's difficult to parse through. You have to kind of go all the way back to the 2009 and 2010 New York Jets teams who did run the ball, but they did so effectively because they had LaDainian Tomlinson and Sean Green. And, the Cowboys have Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders and Jaden Blue and Phil Moffitt. So, I mean, I have tried to act like Pedro Pascal's Mr. Fantastic to connect different dots, but it is very, very, very difficult. I think they want to run the ball. I just have my doubts as to whether or not they'll be able to.
Right, and be able to. I've said to Brad, and I've said to a lot of different people, I think Javonte Williams is set to get back to the trajectory that he was on before he had the injury in Denver. And there's a narrative, so I'm required to say it. Yes, I don't believe Sean Payton runs the ball. He just doesn't. So I think what people know about Javonte Williams, if they didn't know about him from his rookie year to where he is now, I think he's now going to be 3 years removed from the injury. I think he hasn't, been used up. So, this new era of running backs that we have that gets use them all up and then spit them out and go get another one. He's not that. I think he has the ability to do, I don't know about his blocking, but I know he has the ability to catch the ball in the backfield, and then he's also be able to run between the tackles. He can do all the things that a quote-unquote running back can do. I'm not saying he's going to be what Zeke was for you guys, but I believe that they will be able to run the ball now, where I think, they have a capable running back. Now, where I think the issue is, from my perspective, is that offensive line. I was never a fan of Tyler Guyton coming out, when we did our reviews, Brad, right, I didn't like anything about him. I thought he was lazy, and it kind of showed up a little bit throughout. But I like what you guys did in drafting your offensive line. I think if there can be some cohesion there, if the idea, to your point, that they want to run the ball, I think they can run the ball, and Javonte Williams can be, let's say 1,400 to 1,500 yards, total yards, in terms of that between rushing and receiving. And you can get and manufacture, death by 1,000 cuts, to quote, what they do with the Patriots. But I think you can do a lot of that. So I think the running game is actually going to be okay. And that's just my perspective.
That's well analyzed and well assessed. That's another element to what the Cowboys have had developed since training camp began, is they've been just destroyed and decimated by injuries, including one to Tyler Guyton. It remains to be seen how much time he's going to miss, but there was about a 30-minute period, I'm sure y'all are aware, where it was reported that he was feared to have a torn ACL, then it wasn't a torn ACL, and that was a really, just kind of dark 30 minutes. And he's not, I think if you power ranked every player on the team, he might not be in the top 20, he might not be in the top 25, but he plays left tackle. I mean, and so he kind of has to at this point. Now he plays next to Tyler Smith, who might be in your top three or should be in your top three. And so that's going to help, but they are retooling and remaking the offensive line in a lot of ways. And that's where, and I mentioned the Dak Romo comparisons. It's hard not to feel like this is the 2011 Jason Garrett days for Brian Schottenheimer, when the Cowboys were, building and amassing Tyron Smith and Travis Frederick, and then finally Zach Martin. Maybe Tyler Booker is the Zach Martin in that case. But it's weird that history kind of repeats itself in those ways. But, to kind of counter myself, even though I think they want to run the ball, they also didn't trade for George Pickens to run the ball with Javonte Williams. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, like that you kind of have to follow the investments and whatnot. And the offense is at its best when it's running through Dak Prescott. And so this is probably the most potent 1-2 pass catching combination he's had throughout his career. CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper shared a field, but that was in a world where CeeDee still hadn't, become the player we know him to be. So this is, you're talking about two of the, we could quibble, 22, 23 best receivers in the world. So, it stands to reason that that's what they want to do, and that, this run the ball discussion might be similar to what it was for Mike McCarthy back in 2023.
Yeah, I think you could be right. And I'm glad we kind of brought up the run game. I'm glad you brought up George Pickens, because I have serious doubts. It sounds like you have some doubts about the running game as well. For me, I think their biggest concern was both sides of the running game, because they really couldn't run the ball last year. They couldn't stop the run last year. And I thought it was a huge part of why this team underachieved in a lot of ways. But like you said, they go and get George Pickens, super talented. I still have my reservations as far as the off the field locker room concerns. I think are legit. I don't think Tomlin lets a talent like that walk out the door for no reason. But on paper and schematically, it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, getting the true number 2 guy to pair with CeeDee, a guy whose skill set I think actually really pairs well with CeeDee Lamb, being a guy that can stretch the field and open things up underneath, and in the intermediate area for CeeDee Lamb should work. So I think you're right. I think it is going to be an aerial attack for them. I'm curious to kind of see how that all plays out. But I recently heard, so speaking of the roster here, so I recently heard a quote about Stephen Jones being pretty candid about 2 areas of the roster that he's concerned about: cornerback and defensive tackle. Now, he mentioned that health is a big factor for corner, but that they could look outside the building if needed. How do you expect the Cowboys to address those spots, or do they have time to address those spots?
Corner is one where I think you're kind of crossing your fingers. Right now, at the moment we're talking, Trayvon Diggs is on the PUP list. Savon Ravel, the team's third-round pick, is on the NFI list. And so, it stands to reason that they'll come back, or one of them will come back, and you'll kind of get some reinforcements there. Ron Bland, obviously, is kind of the lone holdover point of stability, also in a contract year. What's interesting is the Cowboys seem to want to play him in the slot, which wasn't where he played when he had the crazy pick six season 2 years ago. But that's where Kaiir Elam comes in. I do see the SEC pennant behind you, Brad. I don't know what school that represents, but I'm a Florida Gator, so I hope that's where it comes from.
I've got a Big Ten one too, so it's all football.
Don't let him slide by being a Florida Gator fan. Let that happen, Brad. Don't ignore it. But go ahead, yeah.
So Kaiir Elam is a Gator as well, and that was probably the biggest kind of positive of camp before the Micah Parsons situation just took up all the oxygen in the room. And so I think the plan, if you're crossing your fingers at corners, that Trayvon comes back or Savon Ravel gets healthy, Deron Bland's able to kind of be some stable version of who he's been over the last few years, and that Kaiir Elam can, proved to be the player that Buffalo thought they were getting out of Gainesville. Kalen Carson's a second-year guy, whatever. And that, to me, I know that sounds like a lot of ifs, ands, or buts. That feels stable enough. I mean, I'm not going to kill them for assembling that group the way that they did. Stephon Gilmore did wander through the star during the team's pre-draft press conference, which was kind of strange. And I think a lot of fans would feel better about the state of the position if they called him in and brought in just another point of insurance. And maybe that'll happen. We've seen them execute some trades in recent history, kind of at this time of year when they get closer to 53-man rosters. But defensive tackle is, there's no doubt about it. Like, I don't even think it's fair to call it an Achilles heel. Like, it's like a full back-size tattoo that they have that is painted like a bullseye. And it has been for a long time. Mazi Smith, obviously, you mentioned you have a Big Ten flag. I hope it's not, on behalf of him. Mazi Smith was the first defensive tackle they took in the first round since Russell Maryland in 1991. So this just was not a place where they devoted serious resources. They always just kind of, tried to duct tape and glue and sticks. And he has been a huge miss. I haven't done a 53-man roster prediction this year yet, but I don't know that I would have him on mine. If I did, it would be mostly just because of draft status. And so you talked about last year the Cowboys not being able to stop the run, not to, play home or anything, but I sort of throw 2024 away in terms of any kind of analysis because the front office sabotaged them so much. But it was a huge issue for them down the stretch in 2023. They got destroyed by Buffalo on the ground. They got destroyed by Miami on the ground. They got destroyed by Green Bay in every single facet that football can be played. And so this predates like their current group. It wasn't just Mike Zimmer. It wasn't just Dan Quinn. It was all of this. And in a weird way, that's kind of who they are. They're a culture of dudes who, you can call them soft, or I would disagree with that, to be clear, but like they have a hard time standing up tall in moments like that. It's why they lost the knife fights to San Francisco in the playoffs both times. They're just not a team that can get in the mud and win with you when you have to do that kind of thing. It has to be a little bit more finesse and big plays to George Pickens, and that can win. That totally can win. But sometimes a team like the Eagles exists and just punches you every single play. And I don't know that they have the horses to stand that kind of fight.
Yeah, let's stay right there on the defense, and specifically like you were talking about Mazi Smith. I know we looked at Mazi Smith. We have a couple of huge Michigan fans, and they were like, no, Mazi Smith is not the guy. So one of the things I was wondering, when Jonathan Allen became available from the Commanders, I said, there's no way he gets past Dallas. There can't be any way that this guy, who is a player, I'm not saying he's the greatest, he's probably maybe taking a step back with the injuries or anything, but you need a guy you can plug in there that kind of knows what to do. You have Osa, who's a guy there that's kind of been developing, but if you get a guy like a Jonathan Allen, I just thought so it's a few things. One, I thought for sure Jonathan Allen was going to be on the radar for the Cowboys. But then number two, there's also been the talk about perhaps maybe moving Micah back to linebacker where he can support the run a little bit more. And obviously you've had Overshawn, and unfortunately he's just been delayed by injury. And then you've had to sign to Eddie Kendricks. I think you have Kenneth Murray now, another guy that's kind of oft injured but can play, but is an oft injured guy. So it's not even just the front line guys at the defensive tackle. It's also the linebackers that can't even support if something gets passed that can help make up for what's in the front. So it's like that from a free agent standpoint, and we know as big as the star is, we've always talked about it, right, Brad? I think the last big time free agent they signed was probably Brandon Carr, like of name, kind of in his prime in a sense. So it's not even, it's that. And it's like, okay, for everything that we think the stars that you talked about wanting the attention, these two positions, specifically linebacker, and obviously you can get past Sean Lee and Jalen Smith and those guys that just unfortunately got injured to where they are now, and they just can't up the middle. They're just, I don't want to say soft. They just don't have the guys. They don't have the horses to kind of make up for what we're exactly talking about. But can you talk about kind of not going after some of these guys, specifically Jonathan Allen, if we're just talking about this past season, and then just the injury at linebackers, and then perhaps moving Micah back to linebacker to support some of them?
I'll start with Micah. I want nothing to do with moving him personally. I mean, he's so talented, obviously, but he makes the biggest difference rushing the passer. That's the most impact that any defensive player can make. And so I certainly want to keep him there. That was a conversation, I'd say, like across the first 2 years of his career. And I would say the only reason the Cowboys would ever do that would be so they could pay him like a linebacker instead of like an edge rusher. But that being said, they did sign Solomon Thomas in free agency. That's, he followed Andrew White-Cotton from his time with the New York Jets, obviously. They did get a contract done with Osa Odighizuwa. They were able to beat the franchise tag deadline. And those were, in this offseason, was a little bit nicer for the Cowboys. They did some things. They signed certain players. They made veteran trades. Kenneth Murray was one, Kyrie Elam another, George Pickens, obviously, Joe Milton was the fourth. And I know that that's not a cool thing to say right now in this exact moment, but it made sense and was logical and is still logical. And so those are not positions that they really value. And when they do make investments, historically, they just don't pan out for them. I would say the highest level of investments they've made at linebacker were they spent a first-round pick on Leighton Vander Esch, who was an injury-prone player at Boise State and was a star for them, when he was healthy. But then, those injury concerns just kind of racked up. They spent a second-round pick on, you mentioned Sean Lee, who was a star for them, obviously, but again, just couldn't stay healthy. And at defensive tackle, we talked about it, Mozzie Smith is the lone dude. I mean, Osa Odighizuwa was a third-round pick. Malik Collins was a third-round pick for just Neville Gallimore. Like, they've spent some, top 100 selections at defensive tackle, but spending premium assets, really, it hasn't been their thing. And that, again, is like throughout the entire drought. You're correct. The last big name free agent they signed was Brandon Carr. And because he wasn't prime Deion Sanders, they viewed it as a failure. But he was a really, really, really good player for the team. I mean, a really stable corner. And they have just been spooked. If you have to draw like a line in the sand, like a point of demarcation, it was the 2011 CBA. Roster construction after that day after that time has been so different because of the introduction of the rookie wage scale. And it's been in that time that we have seen the Cowboys be incredibly frugal. The Brandon Carr deal came in 2012, which was just 1 year into it, still kind of developing, modus operandi, how to handle life in this new world. Ever since then, it's been bottom of the barrel, a dude who's kind of damaged, dude who they can get on the cheap. I would say the other, I don't mean to say big name, but big move they made was they signed Greg Harvey in 2015. Obviously, for obvious reasons, he was cheap and available to them. They structured the deal in a way that, again, I hate to use these types of words, but protected themselves financially. And that was the biggest, kind of ambition. Again, very awkward words to use. And I hope that my point is obvious here. But they just don't participate in that time of year. And then they don't draft at these positions. But they do spend in other areas. They will make the trade for wide receivers, whether it's George Pickens or Jonathan Mingo or Amari Cooper. And so they have success in those areas because what a shock. The areas that you invest your most valuable premium resources are the positions and areas where you're going to succeed.
So we talked about Brian Schottenheimer taking over this new leadership, but going back to last year, the Cowboys were fifth worst in pre-snap penalties. And I think this might be flying under the radar a little bit because I'm wondering, what is this new coaching staff going to do to really address this issue? Because it showed up again in their first preseason game against the Rams. And I know it's preseason. You don't want to get too carried away with it, but here we are and it's showing up again. This feels like an issue that they really need to address. Is this something that you've been paying attention to or something that they've been working on at training camp, or any insight on that?
Yeah, I think the most visible answer is that last week, they've had, training camp days can be long and they've had some guys, swinging fists and whatnot. And that happened again after they'd said, no more, you better not do it again. And it happened again, and Brian Schottenheimer just kind of stopped practice and made everybody run. I mean, so if you're looking for like, calls to action that have actually happened, that's the answer. To your point, it didn't exactly take, relative to what we saw against the Rams. But that was a real criticism. I defended Mike McCarthy a lot. I'll sit here for another hour and tell you how he got really no credit for anything he did in Dallas or Green Bay for that matter. But I will certainly say that a huge flaw of his was that his team was pretty poorly disciplined. And that showed up a lot. You can certainly argue that's maybe why they lost a lot of the games that they did. That's maybe why they weren't as prepared as somebody like Kyle Shanahan's teams or, Matt LaFleur's team or whatever the case may be. I don't know that running, sprints is like the magic fix. I mean, I recognize why that's a method that you want to use because, if you've worked in football, that's been your go-to for like 50 years or whatever. But at the same time, these are grown men, these are adults, these are multimillionaires. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that anybody's saying, hey,
it felt like high school when I heard that story. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, again, you do that to your local 3A high school, maybe the kids listen. Maybe they sit up in English and say yes, ma'am to the teacher. But at the NFL, and I don't mean to imply the Cowboys have, disrespectful players or anything like that. It's just a different thing. I mean, and so you have to find those players. You have to cultivate that culture. And I would offer that that's not really a Brian Schottenheimer or a Mike McCarthy problem. That's a culture created by ownership that is distracting everyone with this Micah Parsons situation. Like, nothing is ever serious. Nothing is ever fully about football. There is always some sort of side element. I mean, as we record this conversation, the Cowboys are at a Hollywood premiere for their Netflix special that comes out next week. I mean, so like that's life for them.
Yeah. So going into this season, we've talked about the Brian Schottenheimer, obviously, who's offensive minded, and then you have the new pieces that are brought in, George Pickens. The defense, which I think actually probably will settle in a little bit because I like Matt Eberflus coming in, and I love. I hope I say his name. I hope I don't butcher it. Izabuka. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Coming in as like, especially if the team, from my perspective, looks like, I don't want to call it the Colts, but the Colts with Reggie Wayne and Marvin Harrison Jr., we're going to be playing, the anticipation or thought process from my perspective is we're going to be playing from head a lot. And Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathis, i.e. Micah Parsons and Izabuka, I'm going to be able to put you on there because they're going to be throwing the ball a lot to keep pace with us. So we're going to be able to turn you guys loose to get after the quarterback. And I think Eberflus, despite what people may think of him as a head coach, as a defensive coordinator, I think he has some nice pieces. We've talked about the injuries, but in terms of that pass rush, if the offense is set up to do what you would expect them to do, these two guys, specifically the rookie, can kind of come in, and then the rotation of Fowler, and we're going to get after you with these two edge rushes coming forward. So I like the Eberflus. What has been the talk about the defense?
Yeah, it's Ezuraku. Donovan Ezuraku is the second round pick out of Boston College. And he's had a great camp so far. So it's completely fair to kind of be in on him. Matt Eberflus was sort of the defensive coordinator for the Cowboys before going to Indianapolis himself. That was at a time when Rod Marinelli held that title in an official sense, but Matt Eberflus kind of did the work. And he was critical in the development and the growth and, just kind of overall blossoming of Sean Lee. And so everybody has understood that, he is kind of the linebacker whisperer and that a lot of things will happen under his watch. It was just one preseason game. And as we noted, overreacting to that would be silly. But Maris Liufau, the second-year player out of Notre Dame, looked even better than he did his rookie season. Shamar James, a fellow Florida Gator, looked really solid. He's a rookie. And so I think that we're all being proven correct that Matt Eberflus can kind of turn every linebacker to gold. The Colts comparison, not Matt Eberflus's Colts, but is interesting. And even though the lone Super Bowl that they won came in their first year without Edger and James, it all kind of goes back to that. Like, for a long time, that group had that. And sure, they had, but like, does this Cowboys team even have Joseph Adai? Do they even have Dominique Rhodes? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. And that's, the Cowboys have been this team. I know your question was about Matt Eberflus, where, they just swung to one end of the spectrum as far as running back. Like, dude, what are you doing? You've spent the 4th overall pick. You've doubled down with a $90 million contract. This is way too much energy and time and effort to put into this position. And I know that the entire internet, we've all had the conversation that running backs don't matter, but we know now that they matter a little bit. Like, they matter enough to where you have to have an adult back there or a competent player. And last year when you were trotting Zeke back out there, it just wasn't enough. And Granted, they've gotten closer to kind of where you're supposed to be right now, but again, I just don't know that they have what they need, even if their defense does play well, because their defense played really well in the second playoff loss to San Francisco, and the offense shrunk, right? Like now, that has been their problem, spanning multiple coaches, multiple quarterbacks, multiple stadiums even, is they build their teams as if their two deep is going to be healthy for the entire season. And it's just never going to work that way. You can plan on winning games, 31-28 all you want, but to use those Colts as an example, what was it, the divisional round when they went to Baltimore and they kicked like 6 field goals and won that way? Like, I don't know that this team can they might only have one pitch in their bag.
Yeah, you can go ask the Bengals how that worked out. You mentioned a couple rookies, and I like Donovan Ezerako a lot too. He was a guy that we talked a lot about during our draft coverage. Really, really good player. But rookies, second and third year guys, kind of, some of these younger guys, who are some breakout candidates? Who are some guys that we're going to look at, maybe that are flying on the radar right now, but at the end of the year, we're going to say, wow, that guy really had a heck of a year.
Donovan Ezerako has really popped and gotten a lot of shine. He is the second round draft pick out of Boston College, but the Cowboys, they took a defensive end in the second round last year as well, in Marshawn Nealon, and gave him number 94, thought really highly of him. And again, last year was just kind of broken in a number of ways. And so didn't really have an opportunity for him to pop or thrive. And DeMarcus Lawrence left this team. And while that happened, on some unceremonious terms at the very end, the reality of his departure is it opens up a lot of snaps. And whether that they go to Donovan Ezerako or Marshawn Nealon, I think that Marshawn will really, I think people will, are, no offense to Alex, but like looking at Ezerako as the low-hanging fruit and plucking it and forgetting that the Marshawn Nealon was there just last year. Outside of that, Jake Ferguson was kind of that guy, but he's kind of had his moment in the sun. I think that your average fantasy football player is aware of him at this point in time. Maybe there's a world where Kalen Carson shows up and saves the day at corner. From a receiver standpoint, they are kind of set, like they already do kind of have their dudes at this point. And their running back room is entirely brand new. It is, 2 free agents and 2 rookies in all likelihood, because I don't think that Deuce Vaughn is going to, even make the team, let alone, pop and have a role and kind of come out of nowhere. But I think Marshawn Nealon is the clubhouse leader in that respect. And then I would say, I mentioned him, but Maris Liufau, the Cowboys did not have a 4th round draft pick last year and this year, but last year as a result of the Trey Lance trade. And so they missed out on a running back, and that was when the run happened in the 4th round last year. But they chose in the 3rd round the night before to take Maris Liufau, the linebacker out of Notre Dame. And with DeMarvion Overshown set to miss a lot of time, it does open an opportunity with Matt Eberflus as the defensive coordinator. I could totally see Liufau, because he did shine, throughout December of last year. I could see him really being a guy that people say, where is this dude? He went to Notre Dame, and, how come I don't remember him? Things like that.
What training camp battle, or maybe battles, should Cowboy fans be paying attention to?
I think that the way Joe Milton played in the preseason opener is going to have a lot of Cowboys fans calling for Will Grier to be the backup quarterback for this team. I think if the Cowboys had to win a game right now without Dak Prescott, it would make sense to go with Will Grier. Like he's a better NFL quarterback today, but it makes sense to continue to invest in Joe Milton. I mean, Joe is what Trey Lance should have been. I mean, he was acquired much earlier in the contractual time frame, and so you simply have to give him this time to develop. You have to try that, which again Trey never got. That's obviously been his story in the NFL to date. And so I would say that, like, just kind of keeping eyes, paying attention on that, the running back position, because Phil Maffa, who's if you're looking for a rookie name to watch, and look, everybody is aware of Clemson and what they did in making the playoff last year. It really had a great time. Jaden Blue did not play, but he went to the University of Texas. Again, everybody kind of knows him. Whoever, wins the lion's share of opportunities for the Cowboys at running back, I think is going to become a big name, become somebody who's getting clipped in the Sunday Night Football package, things like that. Maybe not if it's Miles Sanders, but even if it's Javonte Williams, we've seen a lot of names kind of become stars playing running back for the Cowboys, different cast-offs or young players and whatnot. Like even Joseph Randle kind of became a superstar before everything fell apart. And then I would say, if I have to, pick a third, the third wide receiver position is interesting. It's sort of been Jalen Tolbert's, who's been a disappointing third-round pick for them. But Jalen Tolbert played in the opening preseason game. And if you are even kind of important to the Cowboys, they do not play you in the preseason. And so it's kind of like, if you're Jalen Tolbert and you get told, like, hey, suit up, it's almost like, oh, man, like, this is a tough scene. This is a tough look for me. And I don't know who that person would be. I don't know who would take over for him in that third role. Would it be Kevontae Turpin? Will they actually use him that much on offense because he has such a role on special teams? Can Jonathan Mingo turn into something? Obviously was acquired at the deadline last year. Trayshawn Holden's an undrafted free agent out of Oregon who has impressed and surprised a lot of people. So I think that we've kind of penciled in Jalen Tolbert for that role, but somebody could very easily take it from him if he doesn't impress over the rest of camp of the preseason.
From your perspective, where do you see the Cowboys at this season? What are you feeling right now?
I think it's obvious, or I hope it's obvious that I try to be as objective as I can when I talk about this team. And I think that obviously includes the positives. Like wherever you look right now, your favorite sports book, they have the Cowboys at 7.5, maybe 8.5 as far as their projected win total, which is absurd. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you like, oh man, we need to throw the Cowboys a parade. We need to hang a banner. You need to respect this team. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to be fair to the subject here. And this is not a team that does that. And that goes for the Dak Prescott era and the Tony Romo era. I used to say this, and it's true. Tony Romo never played a game where he was mathematically eliminated from playoff contention. And that means nothing, right? Like that's super meaningless, but it's kind of cool. And you know what I mean? And it really just kind of tells you that they were always in the mix. It speaks to like being the kings of being 8-8. And I know that 8 wins is below 8.5, but this team, again, sabotaged itself last year in more ways than 10 and missed their starting quarterback for over half of the season. And in case you forgot, I know I've challenged you a lot on that subject, won 7 games. I mean, so like getting out of bed, you know, they're a lock to win somewhere around 9, 10. I think they probably win 10 games this year. And is that enough to win the NFC East? I have no idea. Obviously, it's a division that just refuses to have a repeat winner. If I ever had to bet on anybody to do it, it would certainly be the Eagles, just based on everything we know. But if history repeats itself and it's a new team, I certainly, like a lot of people, think that Washington will regress. Maybe 10 wins is enough to do it. But at the end of the day, there are 3 wildcard spots. I think that they're going to win 10 games, probably be a playoff team. And then I promise this is not meant to sound like a homer, but they have just kind of drawn the short straw in the playoffs. You know, they ran into this buzzer of a Packers team. They obviously drew Kyle Shanahan's 49ers. They have never gotten in their whole drought. And look, you earn your position in the playoffs, but they've never gotten Daniel Jones in the divisional round. They've never gotten, let alone an NFC championship game where the opposing team lost all of their quarterbacks, right? Like they've lost divisional games to Brett Favre and Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan twice. And so, you know, maybe they win the division and maybe they draw, I don't know, the Michael Penix Falcons. Maybe, you know, something crazy happens to where fate finally smiles upon them. That's what it would take to have to go beyond that. But that's where their truest ceiling, I think, lives. But I think their floor is somewhere around 10 wins and maybe flirting with the division title if everything else breaks properly in that.
Okay. Hey, Brad, and before we get out of here, Gator fan to Gator fan, we're at number 15. Can we make the playoffs?
So I'm also a Sun Devil. Florida's grad school for me, but
okay.
So I'm a lot more bullish on the Sun Devils this year, to be honest with you. But some of that's just like the path, right? Like, you know, the Big 12 is far more conquerable. The schedule's tough, dude. I mean, like it's really tough. And I love DJ Lagway. Can he stay healthy? You know, I mean, like I'm afraid to say that question out loud, but it's kind of like Dak Prescott. Like I don't like the term injury prone, but I can't run from it at this point. Like it is what it is. Now, DJ Lagway is a much younger player and the sample size isn't the same or anything like that. But also, like, I don't know how much I trust Billy Napier. Like I want to believe that the second half of last season was real and was the building block. But I've also watched a lot of football, and I know you have, and we've seen teams that have that second half run, and then we think like, oh, they're going to carry that into next year, and it's just a matter of, no, they just got hot for 2 months, and they really were that bad team, and now you just burned an entire season. So I don't know, maybe John Gruden is the future coach of the Gators, and you know, whatever, but I would bet on it not happening, and I hope to be. I'm going to the Georgia game, so I hope at the very least they make that one a good one, but yeah, it's going to be a fun ride, and that's what matters the most.
Yeah, they're a boomer bust team big time this year. I think they're one of those teams where the floor and the ceiling are very far apart and a tough team to predict. I think I'd put my money on Arizona State Sun Devils going further right now if I had to bet on one of them. Guys, once again, though, we've been excited to be joined by RJ Ochoa. He covers the Dallas Cowboys for SB Nation. Go check out his work there, Blogging the Boys on SB Nation. Great stuff, man. Thank you so much for your time, RJ. This was awesome.
Of course. Thanks so much, y'all, for having me.